I would say the next level is that they are so similar, particularly my oldest niece. She is so similar to my brother. And just to see the way that she approaches the world, and I'm the younger brother. And so being able to see the way that she approaches the world, particularly through his lens is like so fascinating to me. And it also gives me a deeper appreciation for, the relationship that he and I have had. It's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I also want to say, man, I'm so deep. Can you tell me about your camera setup? It seems so cool. What are you using?
Oh, it's just nothing more than a the usual Mac. There's nothing separate.
Really?
Yeah. Um, I just happen to also be in a room that's on more on the outside of like there's natural light coming in a lot of windows. So that
Yeah.
maybe that helps. I don't know, but
Well, it feels as though there seems to be an effect in place where, based off of your movement, it seems to, I don't know if there's like a tracking or whatever, but even, you just,
oh yes. This is
yeah,
a default in the new Macs, the iMacs.
uh-huh.
They've got face tracking. So if I do this.
Oh,
It's not, it's there's no sep it's not a separate camera. It's already built in to
wow.
the new iMacs. Well, I say
Wow.
new, it's like a year old, but roughly. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. That's so cool, man. Are you a tech enthusiast like I am?
I like, yeah, well, I like it, but not for its own sake. I feel like
Okay.
I always ask myself if is it, sometimes you see things that don't really have a problem that they're solving. It's just for the sake of,
Right.
and so I'm not that kind, but more like, isn't this useful? Right?
Yes.
Like, and if it is useful, like what can it let me do that I couldn't do before?
Yes.
That's
Yes.
how I always see tech. I don't actually see tech. I just see a way of doing something better.
Yeah, well, and that's like, I mean, so I suppose that's a great segue for today's conversation related to quantifying waste, across our revenue operation stacks, or even, mindful of our technology requirements and needs. And the parallel for me, I've been doing a bit of studying this morning. HubSpot has a revenue operations course that I've just been watching and, getting acclimated around. And, so much of that conversation is in understanding um, the technology choices and decisions that we make, and understanding, the decisions that we made in previous lifetimes, and being able to understand functionality and or needs as we, move into the present and ultimately into the future. Sorry, I've got some stuff going on in the background. And, I think to your point, the novelty of a technology or a solution isn't necessarily enough to make a decision, particularly when you are looking to scale and grow your organization. And, I think the deeper level of, oh my goodness, the deeper level of, auditing and or assessing, sort of comes in the form of the usefulness, and does the functionality, is it still very helpful, or, is this something that we perhaps need to move away from, which is a little bit of a thought exercise on my side.
Hmm. It's well, before I continue, this is the current podcast we're recording, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, sure, yes. This is a little bit of a behind the scenes, but I did want to
Oh,
provide
I
a bit
see.
of
Okay.
a
I
segue.
didn't know
Yeah.
if this was actually live on the pod, like
No, 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 no. We're not live streaming or anything like
oh,
that.
okay,
It's just a
gotcha.
recording conversation between you and I. But yes, that's great. Yeah,
But at some point you'll like
I will let you know. We'll
uh
officially kick it off.
oh, gotcha. I think that on so back to your point, if you develop a framework for these two things side by side, tech and not necessarily problems, because it's not always problems, I think, that tech solves, which it can, of course. There's this, the first level is problems. If there was a Maslow hierarchy for tech, it would just be that it better solve a problem, right? A pain that I had. But I think also there's enablement of new things, which you never imagined you could do those things before.
Mm.
a prime example is LLMs, large language models. It solves problems, which is like tiresome. I want to write a big 5-page doc about this or something, which is your standard kind of way of, and the pain was that you couldn't spend 3 hours typing or writing, or maybe you didn't know how to. So now it does that for you. But the real question is, what can it do which no human could ever do,
Mm,
which I find much more interesting,
mm,
which is a
mm.
level above just the primitive pain solving, which in our case in operations, is it's like, automate some of our operations, great. That's more like your level one, right? Things that I did by hand, it's now doing by robot, by machine. But what else can it do which I could never do prior?
Mm.
You get into an interesting area there because this thing, if you throw literally hundreds of megabytes of content at it, it's able to do needle in the haystack type operations where
Sure.
find this one paragraph in the middle of nowhere that no human could. It would take them like 5 hours to find this thing and modify it to this specific thing, right? Here's a great example. Let's say that you're an HVAC company. HVAC
Okay.
companies, repair your air conditioning and stuff like
Mm,
that.
mm, mm,
Let's say you have written some internal how-tos for your mechanics and staff and everybody of how to solve common problems with common brands of HVAC. Let's say there's a Lennox kind of, air conditioning unit, and you've got a 60, let's just say a 50-page guide right now inside your company. It's yours. It's your guide.
mm, mm,
Now, Lennox comes out last week with a brand new model, a brand new machine, a brand new system, which comes with its own 200-page manual.
mm, mm,
So now, who's actually going to read every word in that 200-page manual, compare it with the other manual that we have in-house?
mm,
And
mm.
don't touch the knowledge which we already have in-house because it's our unique knowledge. But take what you learn from the official manual, extract only the differences and the relevant
Oh
parts,
my goodness.
and augment that into my existing manual. Now, here's an example of something that I don't think a human would have been really able to do that. Honestly, I mean, they could if they spent literally 2 years at it.
Sure.
But you know what I mean? So I'm very excited that technology, in the subject of technology and what it can do, um, you have those levels of, um, should we say, actual usage of this.
Sure.
So yeah, you can nuance it down to like it's tech, but to what degree does it first solve a pain, but then to what degree do we do things new,
Mm,
or do things that we never could do prior?
certainly. Well,
Anyway, so
yeah, no, and I love that, Amit, and that's such a beautiful thought. And I certainly would love to transition us into today's conversation. I think if through this lens of, the title of today's session is the cost of inefficiency, quantifying waste across your revenue operation stack. Part of the conversation that I had a few weeks ago with one of our RevOps Masters community member, or last week, excuse me, was related to metrics and KPIs and how, sometimes the best laid plans, the assumptions that we make related to the metrics that we, perhaps are uh, positioning our operations around don't quite go far enough or aren't actually measuring the right things that we need to focus on, and some of that pivot that takes place can only occur after we have enough data in order to observe and be able to understand why that positioning or that negotiating wasn't appropriate. And through that lens of the
yeah,
example that you just got done providing, in my opinion, um, for all intents and purposes, the example that you provided, somebody has probably done that before, right? Where, they've released a manual and, hey, teammate, you are responsible for the updates, right? And being able to understand the new information and contextualize that against the old data. And I'm probably going to give you, some sort of proficiency test and or exam, which maybe your job is dependent on, or and so I think to that,
yeah,
right? I think being able to quantify that level of inefficiency is something that, particularly as we're mindful of the promised land of LLMs, it's being able to understand the new ways and that we can perhaps become more efficient, right? While also then being mindful of the historical inefficiencies that have probably plagued most of our organizations for time and time again.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think it's a great summation of that approach, really. Yeah.
as we hop into today's meeting, I would certainly love to have you introduce yourself for our audience. Tell us a little bit. I'm excited about you or today's conversation. To provide some additional background, you and I met through our mutual colleague Grant, who heads up operations, at Atomic Revenue. It sounds like you guys have a bit of a history and, introduced us. But I'd certainly love to hear a little bit about you, your professional background, what you're currently working on, and, then maybe let's dive into the meat and potatoes of today's meeting.
Gotcha. Okay. So this is when we actually record, is it?
Yeah, we're recording. Let's go.
Let's go. Okay. Well, it's great to meet you, Terence, first of all, and thank you for this time and opportunity that you've created for us. So,
Absolutely.
would you like me to do a quick intro as to
Please,
okay.
please.
Well, my name's Amit. I'm the CEO of Tallyfy. Um, Tallyfy is a workflow platform. It's designed for non-technical people. I'm British, currently live in St. Louis. I've been here about a decade or so. And well, I think the origin story of why did we create this in the first place is rooted in my own experience and problems of a decade spent in London, essentially doing process improvement for customers. So they'd bring us into the operations. They would say, at least document our operations first. So we'd create all this documentation about how someone runs their operations. That would end up being SOPs, flowcharts, things like that. And then as soon as we have created, this documentation, it just goes and dies somewhere like in SharePoint, and no one
Mm,
ever looks at it or updates it ever again. It was entirely useless. And so I guess after enough times doing this, we wondered, could you combine the execution, like the actual read, not just reading it, but could you actually execute workflows with both document and execute in the same platform, but also improve processes too? Because I'm a big proponent of Kaizen, Six Sigma, the entire continuous improvement mindset.
yes.
So combining those three just felt like an unsolved problem for me. Which is how can you document without flowcharts so that the average person can do it without being some expert in process or something? Second, how can you run a process by just clicking a button like, okay, let's start running this, track its progress, its real-time progress, and also eliminate the problem of status because people spend hours in meetings just asking each
Mm,
other, what's the status of this workflow? Just people are spending hours just literally just, what did I do? What did you do? What are you doing next? Um, and then their managers keep bugging them about the status of things. Whereas they could see the real-time status, just like you can see a FedEx package in the mail and you can see its current progress to your doorstep. Why
yeah.
can't you do real-time tracking of workflows of specific operations in companies? And finally, the improved part, which is, okay, we're running this process every day, it's digitized, everything's great, but something new, some customer gave us feedback. How would we bake that into our process so that tomorrow morning we wake up and we're using the latest version of the process?
Mm,
Because too many times you have wonderful ideas to improve things from customers or from inside. They just fall on deaf ears. They never get done. And the same mistake keeps happening again and again. People keep saying, next time, can we not forget this? And next
mm,
time comes around, guess what? You've forgotten it again. So could you bake in improvements such that you don't have to retrain people? It just appears in front of them, right?
wow.
So I know it's a bit of a mouthful, but in short, it's how do you document fast with AI in this case? How do you track it within like just start running the process in seconds? So if I'm new to a company, I'm doing it the way the company wants me to without even thinking. It just works. And third, if there's improvements, how do you just bake them in? And so we designed a product that attempts to solve all these problems. And it had to be these three things because just like you can't build a house without building the foundation first, right?
Right.
And you also can't build the roof of the house without building the foundation first. So I think with this thing with AI, everyone's just going on about, oh, I want to do AI. I want to implement AI in all my operations. It's like saying, I want to build the roof of the house, which is AI, but I have no foundation. I don't even have rooms. I don't have a house.
Mhm.
Well, let's just start by, writing down how you do things and actually do them that way. And then we can look at AI and how AI could automate certain bits within that. So I think we want to be a clarifying factor as a product in this world of AI, which is very exciting if done right.
Right.
And as a product, that's what we believe, and that's why this company exists.
I love it. So
Yeah.
how long have you and your partner been working on Tallyfy for?
Yeah, well, my partner, my wife and co-founder, we started Talify together.
Oh,
Um,
wow, wow.
it's a subject for another podcast in terms of how do you work effectively with your wife.
Yes, yes, yes.
A very quick thing about that, we realized we had to have rules really early. Like at 7 o'clock, we drop tools and we become, husband and wife again. If
Mm,
otherwise, we just have carried on like throughout, and it's messy to live and work with someone like that. And
yes.
we founded this as that's why we founded this company as a shared experience of these problems of processes, which is documenting, tracking, and improving them. What became a supercharger was the more recent AI thing,
Mm,
which I would say is only a few years old at this point. And I think that supercharged us to the point where everything we wanted to achieve as a mission when we founded this company can now be massively exponentially done better and faster, each of those things that we wanted to do. So this macro thing happened outside our control. Someone suddenly released this R&D called LLMs, and the
mhm.
whole world changed, right?
Yes.
And for us, that world now is hyper enabled by this underlying tech of LLMs. So it's gone through changes. What I'm saying is that yes, we had a mission, but the world presented things to us that made us twist and turn our own possibilities,
Mm,
especially LLMs and AI in our case.
understood. Well, moving into, some of the basics. And so, what I've heard is that, Talify is an organization that was primarily rooted, or the original mission, sort of came in the form of helping to provide ease of use around SOPs, workflow development, taking institutional knowledge around processes and creating material, well, materials or information that updated in real time, which is, I suppose, the elevation of information and the knowledge, and then ultimately institutional wisdom, right? In
Hmm.
a capacity that would allow organizations to scale. Is that
Hmm.
fair?
Yeah, it's precisely that. And I should really have described it the way you did. That was a great a great summation. Um, and I think what you added just augments to the main core mission, which is that you should document easier, faster, better,
Yes.
track it, or in time, instead of people doing certain tasks, hand them off to a computer use agent or an AI agent to do it for you. And then finally, the self-improvement, which is not something AI can do. Honestly,
Yes.
you have to have this in practice. I think the another best way to describe this is a chef. Let's say you have 20 chefs.
Okay.
We all know they cook food, right? At restaurants. Um, well, when they cook dishes, they have a recipe.
Right.
If they didn't, every dish would literally come out entirely unpredictable, right? So they follow a recipe. They have a team following a recipe usually, and they produce a dish, right? And I think that AI can do can automate some of those bits in the cooking process. You might maybe cutting carrots is a pain, so a robot comes along and cuts them for you. You can take out certain bits. You
Hmm.
can't, however, outsource or push out to an AI like, can you taste this soup for me? Because
Right.
obviously, so
Mm,
there's many
mm,
things you cannot automate and some things you do. And,
certainly.
and you never want to. You need those checks and balances in place. And then the improvement part is someone says to the 20 chefs, that recipe you used to use to cook that soup has changed slightly because the customer gave us feedback. They said, "Oh, it's a bit too salty. It's a bit whatever." So now you change your recipe. You say, "Okay, instead of 2 teaspoons of this, we're going to do 1 teaspoon of this or whatever." Now the thing is, how do you spread that across 20 chefs? How will they
Mm,
know that the recipe changed?
mm,
That's a pain. That's called change management, right? There's entire
yes.
consultancies and armies of people. So the improvement part is actually quite painful. Someone, any feedback you get, you got to bake it back in to the recipe. Not
Mm,
just that, but you have to make sure all the chefs are actually following the new recipe
right.
so that
Mm,
when we open the restaurant, when we open all the restaurants tomorrow morning, that same dish will taste slightly different in all our restaurants
consistently.
consistently.
Yes.
And it sounds easy, but it's actually a really hairy problem in operations, right? So first, how do we do this specific process is one,
Mm.
which you'll be, if you get 20 chefs around the table, they don't all agree that this is not, someone will say this is not the right recipe for this dish, right? So
Right.
first step is just, do you even agree? Do we all agree that this is how we do this dish? So they all got to put their hand up and say, yes, I'm on board. This is great, which is hard enough as it is, right?
Right.
And second is, are they executing? Are all 20 chefs actually following that recipe in the kitchen at the restaurant? Because you can't go jump into, let's buy a robot that does things in the kitchen if each chef has completely different instructions. It doesn't
Right.
work, right?
Right.
How
Right.
do you train this robot if every chef is going to give them a separate different instruction? They need predictability, right? So if you are to instruct AI, it better be standardized.
So,
Otherwise, yeah. Mhm.
Amit, let me ask you a question. Do you believe that the consistency component and teammates having different recipes for doing things is the single biggest operational inefficiency that you have seen across teams? Is that fair?
I think there's two levels here.
Okay.
Managers who may not do the actual work, they desire things like standardization, scalability, consistency.
Mhm.
It might be a managerial aim, or even the company's executives or owners, right? They have this dream that they can triple their size and not worry about it, right? And it's a big dream, right?
Mhm.
And at that level, that's understandable. However, if you go down to the grassroots, which is the people actually doing work, you don't want to burden them with process, right? And like, oh, just be a robot, follow the instructions. You still want to have some element of creativity. What you want to do is help them do what they do, but take away this guilt feeling that I forgot something.
Hmm. Hmm.
So there's two levels, the managerial and let's say the user level, right? Which is that I'm trying to get my job, I'm trying to do work here.
Mhm.
What I'm worried about is I'm going to get told off for missing something or for not doing something right. And when I try to blame like the instructions, that they'll just shrug and say, you should have known, you should have read the 50-page SOP. Really? Who reads the seriously? Are you
Right.
do you read it yourself, right? So no one's gonna read that stuff even as bedtime reading, right? So the execution, making it easy for people to do their work, is actually beneficial to them because they know they did it right at that point. They can still be creative in how they do it, right?
Mhm.
As long as the outcome is the same.
Mhm.
Um, but I think it works best great for both levels, and you have to consider them separately. You can't just
Hmm.
approach this top down and say, we are implementing process across the company. And everyone who actually does the work kind of shrugs and says, oh, this is yet another stupid thing to do in my day.
Right.
And you don't consider the user's needs at the bottom, right?
Certainly.
And if they don't adopt that system or the process, no matter what you say from management, just fails. They'll just shrug and say, I'm going to do it the old way, like I always did. I don't care what my manager or whatever say, what they say. It can happen, right?
Right. You know,
Culture
I
change.
the visualization in my head, you know, and I the complexities of complex systems always, both provide me with confusion and levels of wonder. And it's like creating form to the formless, but then also allowing the formless to take form. if that makes sense in so many different ways. And what I mean by that is, you know, certainly like creating the standards, the format, the recipe that you got done describing, right? But
Hmm.
then to your point, the autonomy, the flexibility, the freedom of, the expression of the form is individualized to the users. And I think the direct participation of managers in that example then allows for what has been formed to perhaps improve, right? Based off of the observability of, hey, well, I didn't know that you could do it like that. And that actually saves us 5 minutes of, uh, carrot cutting time, for example. So that is now the new
Hmm.
process,
Hmm.
right?
And to extend that, we keep using kitchen and chefs and stuff. We're obviously not a robot company. We're
Right.
designed for companies above 20 people that have processes that are usually their office. These are remote workers, office people. They're not,
Okay.
you know, they're not working with their hands and stuff. This app is not, it's designed for professional services, essentially.
Sure, 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 sure,
So
sure.
a better example would be say a purchase request process in finance. People
Yep.
currently have many companies, traditional companies have like if I want to buy something, we have a rigorous process to get that approved.
Okay.
So they write that down. They say, okay, what do you want to buy? Why do you need it for business? Is there a rationale? Maybe there's a policy for that. And then if
Mm,
it's above, like say $5,000, it needs to go to somebody else for approval. If it's above 10,000, got to go to the CFO for approval. So many companies have these. That's an
yep.
example of a real process, right?
Yep. Yep.
Unfortunately, the actual doing of it is a pain. You drop off, you drop an email off with a form to somebody. You never, it's a black hole at that point. You never hear back. You're like, that thing I wanted to buy, like, where is this at? Has anyone approved? And it's actually sitting in someone's inbox, right?
Right.
And you don't even know. It's not visible. Um, and the next week, CFO comes along and says, yeah, there's a new rule for purchasing. Every time we want to buy furniture, Johnny in facilities has to approve.
Okay.
That rule didn't exist last week.
Yes.
So how, like, look at this pain, right? How are you gonna, you never even knew how the old process worked, let alone the new
Right.
one. It's such a, I just don't know how companies got this far, honestly. Um, and here we are just bumbling along, and that's more of a concrete example of a process. So what are the characteristics of this? Well, it's repeatable, it's predictable, like we know what it is.
Mhm, mhm.
It needs to be followed, right? Because maybe for example, in certain government or other kind of institutions like banks, you have to follow that process, either because of compliance or legal. Um, well, even if it wasn't legal, it really should be because there's checks for a reason, right? And so, yeah, I think in that nutshell example, we can center on that as a concrete example of a process, right? Purchase request.
Mhm.
It's many companies have this, and it's it's a tedium.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you can't really automate. You can automate entering data into your ERP or QuickBooks or something, right? That can
Mhm.
be done. However, you can't automate the auto approval of a purchase because if the purchase is $10,000 and the CFO actually has to lay their eyes on it, like we're buying what? We're buying a Lamborghini? Okay. Um, did anyone not check so far that this is not a business purchase, right?
Right.
So you can't AI that piece, right? You have to obviously a human has to lay eyes on it. And then the actual spending part, which is you can't just say to AI, "Here's my credit card, go buy stuff," right? It's going to come back with half of Amazon, right? Agents are known to hallucinate big
Mm.
time. So that's an example of a hybrid,
Certainly.
um, a real process that requires both humans and AI to work in tandem in operations.
Let
Yeah.
me, as a follow-up question, Amit, I'm curious as to, the best laid plans we have, sort of quantified and qualified the reason for the process, but how do we take into consideration the waste of time, opportunity, the headache, for example, of inefficient processes,
Mm.
both by human operators and or AI agents?
That's a great question. And the traditional way of looking at automation is how much time would we save, right? You know,
Mm-hmm.
this was 7 hours. Now you bring AI in, maybe it's like 4 hours now or something, right? But obviously, the other things no one ever considers is quality.
Mm.
Um, a human made a mistake, once every 20 times. Well, maybe a script or an AI thing doesn't. Maybe it makes a mistake once every 10,000 times. So your whole quality is improved, right?
Right, right,
Uh, uh, maybe a human, maybe if you scale that process up, instead of doing it 20 times a week, you did it 600 times a week, which literally is a definition of scaling operations, right?
right,
Just
right,
doing the same thing more, right?
right,
Then are you simply going to hire 50 humans, put them in place and just say, yeah, just do it at larger scale? That's really not going to work because first they have to be trained, they have to remember everything. And there's probably a high churn rate in that situation, right? And as
true.
they leave, new people come with bad habits, they'll mess it all up. So it's actually a friction to scaling. You can't scale without process.
Mm.
There's a reason why every Starbucks has a consistently tasting cappuccino because it actually is scaled as a template in every single store, franchise, otherwise, right? And so the other the ROI beyond just time is we can guarantee that look, there's less mistakes,
Right,
which you can't put in numbers sometimes,
right,
but
mm.
it really does matter, right? And we can scale, you can triple the size of this operation and not lose sleep.
Right,
Again, you can't put numbers on that.
right,
But if you can frictionlessly scale, what's that worth to you, right?
right,
Um, and then maybe the third thing could be the self-improving part. We had a process, we have now this new thing we have to do within it. In the old world, without a system, how would you retrain 80 people that there is this new step to be done by from tomorrow morning onwards because customer gave us feedback and now we should do this the new way? It was a real pain, right? You couldn't. So if you can quantify that as a real benefit too, because
sure.
you can say that if I can improve and bake in my new improvements without having to retrain people, that's a real monetary benefit also. So I think, as you say, there's beyond simply the ROI of efficiency. There's all those other things: quality, standardization, scaling, um, improvability
Yeah,
as well. So only these things come to mind, but there's other benefits too. But
I
so
love
yeah.
that. Well, particularly the component related to, quality and, so much of what I, have been able to synthesize from your response has come in the form of potential. And, I think there's potency and power and potential. And I think to your whole point, we maybe don't have the, you know, best formulas or ways of measuring, X, Y, or Z as it relates to, the potency and power of our organization. But, broadly, quality products, quality systems, quality people, they tend to stick around a little bit longer. And, you know, there's not
Mhm.
much variability, in my opinion, related to, the life of, you know, s-
Yeah. Also, you could successfully transition the company if you wanted to sell it. Because
correct.
without any, if you're fully reliant on people, and it's just all in their heads, and
Hmm.
it's entirely, how would you, if someone else came along wanting to buy the company and everyone left, what would happen, right? The
Totally.
company has no IP of its own except its people, and that is important, I would say, but in a truly large company, that has to be less and less important through time. The IP is in the organization, and I think that the Coca-Cola secret recipe,
Hmm. Hmm.
the the thing that makes you special, that makes your margins
Wow.
really, like your profit margins really fat,
Yes.
is actually how you do things. It's not
Yes.
everyone wants to focus on the sexy stuff like, oh, social media ads, Google ads. I can do my sales and marketing fantastically. Well, that's great, but when you win customers, they all leave
Right.
because you can't actually deliver your services properly. So surely
Wow.
the engine room of, the most unsexy and underappreciated thing in the world is operations.
Yeah.
It's just boring. It's ugly. It's just right. But focusing there is your engine. That is your profit engine. It's also your sole differentiator.
Yes.
If you're an accountancy firm, there's about 50 accountancy firms out there. They can all do your accounts. They can all do your filings. So what differentiates them?
Right.
Well, if one came along and said, we figured out exactly how to use AI to ingest someone's invoices or whatever, right? And we can cut this 9 hour thing down to like 20 seconds, right?
Mm.
And and that's your differentiate. That's your huge thing.
Right.
It's not necessarily winning more clients because winning more clients would just mean you have even more chaos.
Right.
So
Right.
maybe just stopping for a second and saying, instead of growing revenue, can we increase profit margins first? Like through efficiency through all these factors, right?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
then when you do grow revenue, you can actually grow frictionlessly at that point.
Certainly. Yeah,
So
well, it's so interesting, and that's the component related to. I think you inherently implied it, right? The value proposition related to your, oops, excuse me, level of comfort and confidence, deeply rooted in the way that you do things and being unapologetic in that, particularly as it relates to the delivery of value,
mhm,
which, I'm so mindful, people typically like to buy from people that they know, like, and trust, right? And so much of that comes in the form of, hey, I've actually got this formula for, it's a pricing strategy in the form of respect times reputation equals value to the power of values.
mhm,
As you know, if your sort of definition of self-respect, is inherent to your broad levels of your value proposition matches, what if what you say about yourself matches what other people are saying about you, right? You are then able to extract a value formula which is inherent to the way that you do things, right? Whether you value timeliness or integrity or compassion, et cetera, right? And typically, those then, the value alignment then comes in the form of, well, these are the organizations, the people, the businesses that I like buying from because they're, my respect for them matches broad levels of their reputation, and I'm willing to pay a
mhm.
premium based off of the way that they make me feel about the purchase in so many different ways, right? And that level of consistency is sort of, it feeds itself in so many different ways, and I then become a return customer that wants to continue to buy over and over again based off of that level of predictability.
Yeah, I think you struck on a great dimension of values that's obviously outside of operations somewhat. It's the
Sure.
organization's positioning, it's people mentality and everything else like this. But I think you can still expose yourself to have erosion of those values, to even lose all those that trust you that people had in you if you simply don't deliver what the basic thing is that you should.
Right.
You can love and trust someone as much as you want, but how much do you put up with when it comes, let's say that one popular process that people use our app Tallyfy for is onboarding new customers,
Okay.
the customer onboarding process, right?
Yes.
Why is
Yes.
it important? Well, it's a first impression, right? Um, they've been sold some promises, a deal by sales. They've
Hmm.
been sold this wonderful, beautiful vision of a thing like, oh, buy this service from us. We're fantastic. Now,
The abstract.
sales passes it on to operations to actually do the work, right?
Right. Right.
And at that point, everything that was wonderful begins to become murky because they're like, oh, but I already told sales guy that I wanted this thing, and what are you doing here? And why are you asking me this again? And so if you don't have a process for onboarding, um, it's not clear to them how will they actually be onboarded to your service
Right.
in a more complex service, for example. Like an agency, let's say, or an accounting firm, they all have onboarding processes. So that should be structured. It should be the handoff and all that should be proper, right? The data collection should also be client facing. And
Yes.
It's not like let's jump on a call, please, to find out this info. They actually just want to go somewhere and just type it all at any time that suits them sometimes. And by the way, half the world is probably introvert. So they don't want to talk to anyone anyway, right? So the classic sales mentality of everything is just phone, phone, let's just call. Well, that's not half of people don't want to do that anyway. They just want you to say, what do you want from me? Give me a link, right? I'll go to that link any time of day or night, type in what you want, we're done. Why should I have to
Right.
jump on a call for you to get basic information from me? Um, Not to mention ambiguity. Like I said this, you heard this, everything was misunderstood,
Totally.
and so and the customer facing process there is then it just amplifies the value. So if you like the company, you bought from them because you like them, and now the delivery matches as well, it's like, wow, this is smooth. That's just going to amplify, right? But if you love and trust the company you bought and then the actual product and service sucks, you might still like them a little bit, but you'll be more hesitant at this point. You're like, maybe they're not as great as I thought, and at some point it'll go gone. All these things will be gone if the engine
Certainly.
itself doesn't work, right? An engine powers that car. You can be
Yeah.
sold any kind of dream about this car. Look how beautiful it is. It's like 100% recycled car, whatever it is. Yeah. And you might have loved the company. But if the actual car doesn't go from A to B in a smooth
Right.
way, what does the rest doesn't matter anymore. It's just all big talk.
Certainly. Oh my goodness. Well, and that goes back to, I mean, goodness, like the potency, the potential, the power, right? And I think you really just did a great job visualizing, that onboarding process where, to your point, right, if this if the promise, this abstraction of the value that we are delivering doesn't match the core processes, right, of going from, promise to what then is being delivered, right, that perhaps influences the potent potential of that particular client. They're rebilling, for example, are they going to, once this initial sort of contract delivery has taken place, do they feel as confident as they did before they went through that onboarding process, right? And are
Mhm.
you then measuring like what could have been, for example, you could have billed, at a two times higher rate or had a longer term contract if you had been more appropriate or been able to sort of match that expectation from, that great promise on through to delivery, which a lot of organizations don't necessarily measure.
Mhm.
Churn is certainly something that, we all sort of hear, right? And there's the old adage about what is it? It's like four times as much as is expensive to get a customer
Yeah.
back, or, right? Something along those lines.
Yeah. Then to
Uh,
upsell or to just sell more to an existing customer. Yeah.
certainly.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it, and no one looks at this. The sexy part is just, oh, we have this great lead gen, this great marketing, but it's it really is like just saying that the surface of my car is shiny and nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And since no one's popped seen the inside of the car and how much it sucks and everything's rusted and nothing works,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is the engine, which is the operations, right?
Correct.
Um,
Perfect.
it's it's like, well, at some point someone's gonna say, yeah, nice, but the actual car doesn't work, right? So it's I mean, at the end of the day, this is in a long-term perspective, that's gonna, you know, erode everything you worked for, So uh, anyway, because I'm in the operations kind of obsession, I feel like it's so underrated. Uh, the thing is, explaining this to people, it's just not very sexy. It's not the kind of thing you would, like talking about the car again. You talk about the other stuff. You talk about, self-driving. You talk about how beautiful the color is, how, the electric windows, the power seats. And the thing is, mechanics, the people who actually make cars don't really care about those things.
Right. Right.
They
Right.
they work on things that actually like a turbocharger in an engine might be incredibly unsexy. No one knows anything about it. No one even cares. But, a 10% improvement in that, or the way it works, or its efficiency, has this huge effect in everything, in power
Totally.
generation, in the car's kind of acceleration, in how efficiently it consumes power, right? It's so I think creating a process inventory in an organization of this is our processes, um, doing those
Wow.
those three things, which is like
Yeah.
we cannot actually function if we didn't do each of these things right internally and externally. Customer onboarding would be like internal and external, really.
Okay.
The finance approval, the purchase approval, that would be internal because internally you would do that. Another one, every department has processes. There's also
Sure.
employee onboarding. In HR, when you onboard an employee, today it might take them 2 months to get up to speed and actually be productive in a new job. Could you actually make it a month?
Mm,
If you could halve onboarding for a new employee, you save a month of productivity. And
right.
more importantly, everything that should be done is done correctly.
Right.
This whole the most annoying question in the annoying statement in the world is like, oh, I forgot. Like, I mean, how many times do you want to say, oh, I forgot?
Right.
For anyone in your company, right? At some point, that oh, I forgot will reach the customer
Mm,
and their trust will just begin to break.
certainly.
So it's not just an
You know,
internal thing. This is going to get eventually to the customer.
well, to that, and I love the analogies that we've been using, and I suppose we're sort of in workflow design and data. Um, but what I'm so mindful of is, okay, well, let's say like you go to a Lamborghini dealership and
Mhm,
the guys just, got done telling you like how amazing this car is, and maybe somebody has replace the engine with you got done describing with, the engine of like a Honda Civic, for example.
mhm,
And, perhaps, yeah, maybe the car does look awesome. And technically it's still a Lamborghini, right? Even though, or is it,
mhm,
right? Because it doesn't have a Lamborghini motor, right? And which then ultimately impacts the performance of the car, right? Where you're
mhm,
not even able to get the full breadth of the Lamborghini, because it's operating with the Honda Civic motor. For example, the power
mhm,
windows don't work as efficiently. You're not able to, you're not able to leverage the power that you just got done describing. And that seems like a pretty important detail. And if you didn't sort of communicate that as you were promising me, how cool I was going to look in this car and how it was going to change my life, well, to your whole point, like, well, you have every reason to feel upset, right? This is not what you promised me, and this is not what I paid for.
Yeah, and in this case, let's say in this example, one thing to add is that it is a discretionary purchase. Um, if you went
Sure.
out, in terms of, it's kind of partly vanity, partly I want to look like I'm driving a Lamborghini, right? But by and large, for organizations,
Yeah.
they don't tend to be discretionary. It's like I actually need this. I actually, there's a functional need somebody to do this for me, um, to in operations, and but the same thing applies. What you said, it's and that point, then it does matter how the specifics work, as opposed to just it's a Lamborghini.
Correct.
If you just want the
Correct.
brand, even though the car sucks, you just want the brand, you will purchase the brand probably, right?
Mm,
But even that's going to erode in time because you're going to realize the Lamborghini club will say, notice how the engine kind of always messes up on the third year of purchase, right? And there's a big repair bill from the garage, like year three, year four, right?
right.
Eventually, that's going to spill out. And then you're on the downhill, right?
Mm,
And at some point, someone's going to say, can we switch to Bugatti now? Because these people don't know how to make cars that well. And
right.
obviously, the big famous example is Toyota. Toyota's
Okay.
created the Kaizen Six Sigma kind of continuous improvement system. And
Okay.
they're
I didn't know
legend.
that.
Yeah, in the early days in manufacturing, Six Sigma was used to remove defects from the manufacturing line. And their famous reliability has come from this Kaizen type
Mm,
approach, which is just
mm,
that any mistake we make, the whole production line stops. We
Wow.
diagnose it, we find the root cause, and only then we begin making again. And Six
Wow.
Sigma really
Wow.
just means that the defects are only happen 0.00001% of the time. Like we have almost no defects in how we make things. I don't see why, probably 70% of the US GDP is services, not necessarily
Wow.
currently manufacturing and things like that, right? And if you can deliver services in the same way, mistake-free, defect-free, thoroughly reliable, which not many people do nowadays, that is your competitive advantage. That's your
Right.
moat. That's what, Warren Buffett calls a moat, right? It's
Mhm.
it's a real no one else can compete if you continuously improve your operations.
Right.
There's
Wow.
actually there's a famous book, I don't know if you know it, by James Clear called Atomic Habits. It's I
Oh,
think
yes. Yes. Yes.
and it basically talks about improvement. If you improve by 1% each day,
Mm,
you'll end up 37 times better in a year because improvements actually compound.
right.
They compound on top of each other. And a company that is 37 times better at doing something in operations is definitely going to just kick everyone's ass and just become the leader in the industry by far. Like, especially
Goodness.
if it's service oriented, right? So I don't know why no, more people don't see this. You know,
Right.
it's it's the most understated moats that in existence. But because of its unsexiness, again, we it has to be explained. It has to be evangelized. Um, and people know it, they just don't know what to do about it. Like, how do I actually make
Right.
this happen? Which is where that's what we're doing at Tallyfy. We're trying to make it easy for them to implement these ideas. Um, they used to be difficult to do this. Yeah. So, well, um, yeah, but sorry, that went a little bit off track to your previous
No,
question,
no,
I
you
know,
did
but
such a great job, and so many visualizations. I can't wait for, this video to come out. Oh my goodness, I should have had my phone on mute, apologize, or do not disturb, excuse me, which I'll put on right now. And just being mindful of time, I do want to ask you a couple more questions before, I give you back the gift of your day. But in terms of metrics and KPIs, particularly through this lens of quantifying waste, in your opinion, what are the right metrics to track when measuring the ROI of operational improvements or workflow automation?
if you want to measure the ROI of some automation, I think the first step would be to write down how the automations, how things are done without the automation first.
Okay,
So just step by step, how do people do this today, right? And then actually do it, like have people do it. So forget about the automation bit. Just do
get the
the
data.
like. It's kind of like, let's give you a chef example again, right? If a chef says, "How do I automate cooking this recipe, cooking this dish?" Well, maybe we should backtrack a bit. What is the recipe for the dish? How do you cook this dish? Within this recipe, what can be automated and what cannot be automated?
Mhm, mhm.
So that has to be done prior to saying anything about automation. If you just go
Right,
willy-nilly straight towards automation, you're just going, again, you're going trying to build a roof of a house when the foundation doesn't even exist. So
right.
you have to build a foundation in this case, which is the steps you need. Like here's the steps. Prove that people actually do those steps. Don't just write
Mm,
document like in the ideal world situation. Like this is how the
mhm.
perfect recipe works. When in reality, no one actually does it that way, right? Because if you
Right,
then automate based on the non-reality of it, again, automation will fail, right?
yeah.
Um, and then as people do something, they will tell you that they'll improve those through people feedback, which again, AI
Mm,
doesn't know. It doesn't have that sense check today, right? And only after that, you might say, okay, out of 20 steps, 5 are perfect for initial automation.
okay,
Now, also the word automation, by the way, means many things. Um,
yes.
it could mean just pushing data from app A to app B, integration. Like just move this data from this app to this app. That's not automation. That's just data movement. you know.
Sure, sure.
You can call it automation, but it's actually just integration, right?
Yep,
Another
yep.
thing, the second automation would be a script. So a human used to do this. Can
Mhm.
we ask our AI to code, write some piece of code, which will just literally do it for me as a script?
Mm.
That's not very clever, but I don't know. It's so underrated. Again, you don't need to jump to AI and everything. You can just have a script. And guess what? For
Yep,
40 years, people just wrote scripts.
yep,
Programmers literally wrote scripts. And
yep.
they worked
Hmm.
fine. They still work fine, right? There's nothing wrong with them. They actually work perfectly. And then finally, you have something that's ambiguous, like what AI does, like write me an email to a client which says this, this, and this. It's not really a script. That's more like you can have changeable expression. And there might be different ways of saying the same thing. That's an
Mhm,
appropriate use of, let's say, AI, right? LLMs.
mhm.
So in my mind, automations have three buckets. Integration, just moving data between apps,
Okay.
uh, which you can definitely write scripts for, which is the second thing. Scripts, by the way, don't charge you by the token. Once you've written the script, you just run it on your server. It's free. It's
Over and over
essentially,
again. Yep.
yeah. And it's not like you're paying or waiting for AI to, it doesn't need to be clever. It's just a script, you know. It's like the overuse of AI is another big problem that you can just simplify it somewhat. And then of course you've got AI, which is the ambiguous things like writing,
Mm,
especially. Um, that's I think one of the or kind of doing something in a legacy product using computer AI, using your mouse and keyboard. So so I think if you like the approach to workflow automation could go through these phases. Document, actually run it as a human, then look for opportunities to automate.
mm. I
And
love
it,
that.
it seems more sensible that way. Otherwise, you're gonna be floundering around with all kinds of chaos by jumping straight into just automation on its own. Yeah.
Yeah. This was awesome, Amit. I mean, my assumption is that we're probably going to need to have a part two in the next couple weeks because you are just this wealth of information and knowledge, and I'm just so deeply appreciative of just your time and your energy and just your level of attention to detail. And I certainly need to learn a little bit more about Tallyfy. As a reminder, for everyone, Atomic is an EOS organization, and we are very big on process and systems. And part of that accountability comes in the form of assessing new tools that we can integrate into our technology stack. And Tallyfy is actually one that I have been playing a little bit with as a result of some internal recommendations. And so I'm excited to, learn a little bit more about the tool, and particularly how I use it around our quarterly business reviews with some of our clients. But Amit, why don't you tell us a little bit more about ways for our audience to get to engage with you, to learn a little bit more about the product, and any perhaps like any opportunities to connect with you moving into the future.
Hmm. Yes, in a quick summary, we're not so much a product, but we're more of a belief system. And
Ooh, okay.
we have to first believe that projects are just ad hoc, they can't be automated, which is true. Projects are normally just unique things. That means you have to get into process thinking, right? So if you believe in process, scalable, repeatable, predictable, all that stuff, consistent, right? You first have to believe in that philosophy. You have to care about it. If you care about it, our product is just a manifestation of that philosophy. And I think the first step is, do you believe in process? Do you believe
Yeah,
in its power? Could it be your differentiator as a company?
yeah.
If it is, we can, just go to talify.com. We can chat about how you can document, track, and improve your processes and automate them in time. But if you simply come in with, I want a product,
Not the right.
we'll be asking you why. Yeah. You tell us why you need this product. And funnily enough, no one really knows why. They just
Mm,
know that I should go and get a product, right? And usually they go into a project management tool of some kind, which is not really designed for process in general. So I
mm,
think the first step is just a mindset shift in, do we want to be a process driven company?
yeah.
You can only proceed if we answer yes to that. That means you're going to win and we're going to win. But if you simply like, can I just get a demo of this product? I don't really know what it does, but then I guess we'd have to start from scratch here. right? It's like me trying to sell you, tea, drink tea, right? I drink tea and coffee, but if you simply don't believe in tea, there's nothing I can say or do, right? You have to be like, look, I want to consume tea because maybe it's got health benefits or whatever, right? Like you got to come in saying, I want to drink tea now. Now it's like, okay, now we can talk, right? We can talk about tea. Great. But if I have to convince you that you need to drink tea, well, you know,
Might not be.
yeah. So, and in a nutshell, we can help you for sure. So if you're looking or thinking about process-driven thinking and all that, we would love to take you through that, even if you don't know anything about it. Be happy to tell you. So although I make a, joke out of this, we are happy to explain to you the benefits of process thinking. And EOS has a process component, I believe, too, um, baked in, which we've seen often in EOS-driven companies. Um, so if that's something is your core belief and you believe in it, we'd be very happy to speak to you. We can make all that come alive, all those ideas, and put them in practice with a product like ours. But just like EOS, it does need a mindset shift in how you see your operations running and how you see everything in your company, you know. And I hope that's a long answer to your short question. I'm so sorry.
No, no, not
No.
at all. You did exactly what you were supposed to do, and I love the level of integrity of your product and service offering. You know, particularly rooted in your personal beliefs, which is so important. And I think more organizations, to your whole point, need to sort of recognize how that is inherent to the IP, right? The intellectual property of the value delivery. So, but again,
Yeah.
I'm very thank you, thank you, thank you for the day. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording with the caveat that if you're watching the replay,